And good evening,
Sorry.
everyone. Welcome. Tuesday night Q&A.
Hey,
I'm Clay, joined by E-Train, who is her...
I didn't get a great introduction that time. Come on.
I wasn't finished.
Okay, sorry.
Who is gracing us with her usual sweet and gracious countenance tonight.
If y'all saw what just happened backstage, you would not agree with that.
That's all right. All they need to know is what I tell them.
There you go.
Because what I say is the truth.
There you go.
Hello, Melissa.
It's God
How
Day
are
to
you
you
doing?
too, honey.
God Day to you too. Tuesday.
God is always good.
Is there a Seventh-day Adventist, are like on Saturday? Is anybody on a Tuesday?
Well, I was thinking like maybe God Day, and I'm like, okay, should we give her some loving or what's going on? Good oi.
Good
Okay,
boy
just
for
making
you as
sure.
well.
Mm-hmm. All the above.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Melissa is a much beloved member of the family. She's been with us for quite a while and is a dear friend, sweet spirit. She is our Pug Circus
Love.
expert. Love Pug Circus. That's it. So if you need anything as far as pugs, Melissa is your source. Her website, Love Pug Circus. And hello, Jane, another much beloved member of the family. Good to see you.
Happy Tuesday to you.
Happy Tuesday to you. Hope everybody had a good Memorial Day weekend. We had a little neighborhood cookout, and I was put in charge of the grill, cooking dogs for 50 people.
Really?
Best
How about your
dogs
salad?
we've had.
How about your salad?
The salad was okay. It wasn't a huge hit. The dogs were a huge hit.
Oh.
But
I bet the neighborhood is so happy right now that I'm not there because
why?
everyone can cook dogs anywhere they want to. I'm allergic.
They could cook dogs. They could cook dogs before. Ellen dogs do not sit well with E-Train. She can't eat them. So anytime there's dogs, she's usually a spectator.
Yep.
We'll give Jamie a hug for us. And then Melissa, I often think about
And
the
a
Jimmy
hot paw.
Buffett.
Remember the concert that we did? That we live streamed?
Yeah. With Jimmy Buffett. The sound wasn't that great, unfortunately.
We
but
tried.
it was a good night. It was a good night.
Mm-hmm.
And good memory, Melissa. I had actually forgotten about that till you mentioned it. Yeah, we had another neighborhood block party, and it was a kind of a shortly after Jimmy Buffett died, and it was kind of a celebration of Jimmy Buffett's music. So it was a bittersweet night. Ellen was a huge.
Of course, we got
Buffett
copyright
fan.
strikes.
Oh yeah, we got copyright strikes all over the place.
Oh yeah, left, right, forwards, backwards.
Still getting them on occasion. So
they love us so much.
I know.
The YouTubes.
YouTube is difficult to work with at times. They are. There's no winning if they say something. You can appeal, but it's just a waste of bandwidth.
Yeah, you have to have an attorney.
Yeah, it's just a pain. And our channel's kind of small, so it's just not worth. It's just like pissing in the wind trying to argue with them. Well, want to welcome everybody back to the show. tonight, Tuesday Q&A. So it is kind of your night. If you've got questions, comments, thoughts, something you want to talk about or ask questions about, feel free. For those of you on Rumble and X, now Rumble, I'm still not sure about if the questions are forwarded, but E-Train is monitoring those and she will relay them.
Yep.
And yes, they took down the solar cooking video. I still don't know why.
They said that we posted content that happened in the past and tried to make it seem like it was in the here and now. I call bullshit.
Well,
that was the actual complaint.
Didn't know that. And they were kind of right, because E-Train was up in Pennsylvania and filmed it with Jane about a week before we uploaded it.
But we told them, we said that it was taken down in the past. So whatever.
I was being
did it in the past.
A week in the past.
Oh.
Yeah.
I know.
And it was,
and I was there
live.
And it was our thing.
Did you broadcast it live? We broadcast it live, actually. You were there cooking during the time.
No, I was there and recorded it live, but I did not broadcast it live. Okay. But we said that I had gone up there and that was the deal.
Yeah.
That's kind of silly.
I just don't see what the problem was with that. But anyway, that's like we say, it's YouTube. There's no arguing with them. If they take it down, it's gone. So we're going to try to get another one up sometime. I don't know what we'll do different, but because to do the solar cooking, it takes 5, 10, 20 minutes.
And I think the major problem with the video was that it was the night that Trump got shot.
Was it?
Remember?
Didn't remember that.
Yeah, when he got shot in the ear, that was the night that we put it out.
Oh, because we were also kind of live streaming some of the news. I remember
updating.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yep.
So if you've got some questions or comments, throw them out.
Yeah.
Did get some questions. We're going to try to address those as we go through. One thing that's, gotten a little attention or interest is outside of the U.S., actually, which we do have people overseas watching, but we're stepping outside the U.S. for a moment, but not too far, because what's happening in Japan's bond market and central bank activities may actually land squarely on the doorstep of U.S. investors. So if you're in equities, bonds, macro trades, even real estate, you will want to understand how the slow motion financial crisis forming in Japan, forming in Tokyo, could ripple in your portfolios. So this episode, it's kind of a warning shot we're firing on the fragility of what I would call the modern debt-based economies. Central bank, I'm going to say entrapment, and why Japan, long considered the poster child for it can go on forever, debt borrowing can go on forever, may finally be running out of road. So let's get started, and I will even remember this time to share the screen. But
look at you.
I'm getting better at that. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I went half the show talking and forgot to put up the slides. E-Train finally mentioned
3/4 of the show. Then you were like, So on this slide, it wasn't. I'm like, what slide? There's no slide. And Jane, we will.
Too many buttons to hit all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And I get easily distracted, I guess. I don't know. But let's start with the headline that dropped this morning. Japan's finance ministry announced that Japan has officially lost its status as the world's top creditor for the first time in 34 years. This didn't get a whole lot of press in the U.S., but it's really a seismic shift in global financial dynamics, because for decades, Japan has always been considered as the world's safe lender, a reliable buyer of global debt, particularly U.S. treasuries, thanks to its massive savings rate and current account surpluses, its trade surplus. But now Germany has taken the top spot, driven by a larger.
Wait, what?
Pardon?
It was China. It was China, then Japan, and now Germany?
No, it's always been Japan.
Because China owned most of our debt for a very long time.
No, not our debt. I'm talking about the top lender in the world. Now, China owned more.
Okay.
Actually, Japan has owned more of our debt. Japan owns about 1.1, has owned about 1.3 trillion. China was 900 trillion. But in terms of global debt,
okay,
Japan has been at it much longer and much more extensively.
Okay, fair enough. Because that is a point that people get confused on, because forever we were told that China owned us pretty much. They could offload all of our crap or not pay anything, whatever, and we would be screwed.
Well, they owned a chunk. Japan owns a chunk, but it was never quite as easy as they just dumping it all at once. That would hurt them a great deal too. So people who say that really, hypothetically, yes, it's possible. Realistically, no, it's not a consideration.
Okay, fair enough.
Now, the issue with Japan is that this loss of status, let's say, isn't just symbolic. It's really kind of a signal that the global financial order is shifting, and the ripple effects can be pretty profound. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, to try to understand why this matters to you as an investor. But to do that, we need to start off kind of zooming in on Japan's situation, its debt situation, which is, in my opinion, nothing short of staggering. Japan's government debt stands at about 7.8 trillion. Okay, we kind of laugh and go, that's just a third of ours. But that 7.8 trillion gives them a debt to GDP ratio. GDP is the total production of their economy. The amount of debt to their total economy of about 260%. So that's like saying well, let me just give you some context. That compares to 124% for the U.S., which is pretty obscene, actually. 124% is extremely high. Well, Japan has more than doubled that. Melissa, now I want sushi. I haven't had sushi in a while now that you mentioned it. Now you made me
yummy.
Oh,
you're talking to her. Okay, never mind.
All right, Japan's debt. Sorry, I've got a lot of thoughts in here. And also my sound just got screwed up. I don't know why, but we're going to fix that real quick. All right, that should take care of it. I don't want any feedback coming back on the mic. Now, Japan's debt, 260%. Ours is 124. Even Japan's government is now admitting that this is an extremely bad situation. Their prime minister was speaking to their parliament, talking about their debt, and his exact quote was that their condition is, quote, extremely poor, worse than Greece's. Worse than Greece. That's saying something. The Greece debt crisis in 2010, when they went kind of de facto bankrupt. But unlike Greece, Japan has its own currency. Greece is in the euro. Japan has the yen. It has a massive stockpile of foreign assets, which Greece had none. Like I say, it has about 1.1, maybe 1.2 trillion in U.S. treasuries, which historically has given it some breathing room. But that room is getting very small, turning into a very small, cramped closet, actually. Cracks in Japan's financial system are becoming impossible to ignore. And that's what we're going to get into.
Melissa,
you're thinking about what kind of roll you want, aren't you? You mean like a dragon roll?
Mm-hmm.
So the big picture. Japan's government to debt ratio is the highest in the world. 250, 260%. The number is so large, it's basically fictional for most Americans. And for decades, this high government to debt ratio, it's been increasing, but this high government debt ratio has really not drawn a lot of international concern because Japan has some interesting characteristics financially. First of all, most of its debt is largely domestically owned. Their people buy their debt. The Bank of Japan, in particularly, has aggressively bought the bonds. It owns over 50% of all the debt, which has helped keep rates down. It's kind of their version of the Federal Reserve's QE and capped yields, but that's also a big risk. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. If any of you get on YouTube, even on your computer or wherever, and you can't make a comment anywhere, you have to log out and log back in so you can say something. Just FYI, it happens to me a lot where I can't say anything. Yeah, so I have to log out, log back in, go back to where I was, and then I can make a comment.
That's interesting.
Melissa, you know it? That. Yeah, it happens more often than not.
Well, thanks, YouTube.
Yeah, just another way they support us and love us to death.
And so even though Japan has had this huge stimulus, I'll call it, for ever since the 1990s, their economy has been stagnant, moribund, very, very low growth. And, it's been largely deflationary, kept the cost of debt service manageable. I mean, their interest rates they even had negative interest rates in the short term for years, negative interest rates. So if you want to borrow money, if you want to lend money to Japan's government short term, you would pay the interest. You wouldn't receive anything. You'd pay it. And that's kept the cost of debt for Japan, their interest expense, manageable, very manageable with such high debt until now. We are entering what I'll label the exit era. Global yields all over the globe, obviously, have surged. Inflation is increased everywhere, and Japan is trapped. Japan is screwed. I would use another euphemism, but trying to keep this kind of family friendly. But Japan is screwed.
Brandy?
So let's lay out 5 ingredients of what's, some would call a perfect storm for Japan. A perfect storm. Anybody see that movie?
Yes.
Long ago? It was actually a pretty decent movie.
Yeah, but it was.
When I see just a exposition of a number of factors all playing in, I always think a perfect storm. I always think about that movie. Well, the 5 ingredients. First of all, Japan's yield curve is cracking, shattering into pieces. Now, for years, the BOJ, the Bank of Japan, kept their interest rates extremely low. What they called yield curve control, YCC. That was a policy to keep particularly the 10-year Japanese bond below 0.25%. So 0.25% for 10 years. They later relaxed it to 5%. I'm sorry, 0.5%, 0.5%. And then recently, last August, had to raise it to 1%. Now, think of it as, and all this time, bond investors have wanted rates to rise, but the Bank of Japan keeps buying bonds, keeping the rates low. And think of it as Japan's bank saying, we'll suppress rates no matter how much we have to buy. This is similar to what the Fed did in QE after the subprime crisis for a decade, and is a large part of what got us into the mess we're in now. And remember, I'm talking about suppressed rates. Remember that teeter-totter. I talk about it all the time. A bond is similar to a teeter-totter. You've got 2 things that move, the yield and the price. So if the price goes down, the yield goes up. If rates go up, price goes down. So if the Bank of Japan wants to keep rates low, they go out in the market and buy Japanese bonds, supply and demand. The greater the demand for the bonds, well, that price rises. That increase in price lowers the yield. So that's how central banks manage or have managed interest rates the past 15 years. Now, that ends up kind of screwing the market, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's same thing the Federal Reserve has done the past 10, 15 years. Well, like I say, yields on the 10-year bond have increased, recently touched 1%. Now, for comparison, the American 10-year bond, Treasury bond, is at 4.5%. Japan has a 30-year bond as well, and its 30-year yield just topped 2%. Well, over the past couple of weeks, that's blown up to 2.8%. So it's gone from a percent and a half to 2.8%. That's double or 2.5 times what it was in just a few months. Now you think 2.8%, that's still kind of cheap. Problem is, like the 10-year, it was at 0.25%. Now it's 1%. And you think 1% interest, that's still pretty cheap. But for somebody like the government who is paying interest on debt, their debt going from 0.25 to 1% increases their interest expense 4 times. That's why it's devastating to the government, because they've gotten used in their budget to having this amount of interest expense. Now, all of a sudden, that's doubling, tripling, quadrupling. And if you'll notice, in 5 short years, the U.S. government, our interest expense has gone from 450 billion to 1.2 trillion. It's tripled. We now spend more on interest than we do on national defense. And interest expense is about to pass Social Security expense.
Yep.
Another couple of years, it will pass the number one budget item, Medicare, Medicaid expense. So just think about it. We'll be borrowing money to pay interest on the national debt. How cool is that? Well, that's where Japan is getting to. That's where Japan is. And once rates rise, particularly in Japan's case, they face what economists will call a doom loop. Debt costs explode. Interest costs explode. Investors start to sell because they're concerned about the government's ability to pay the interest. Well, the more they sell, the lower the price on the bonds drop. Teeter-totter. Price drops, interest rates rise. So the more they sell, the more interest rates rise. And the more the Bank of Japan has to intervene, the more bonds the Bank of Japan has to buy. Well, to buy bonds, they have to print money.
Money, which is what we did during COVID.
Yes. And that's where you get huge inflation.
Yep.
It also weakens the currency, which also makes every product Japan imports more expensive. That also adds to inflation. So the BOJ is in a hard place. It can't hike rates because the government can't afford the interest expense, and it can't cut rates because that increases inflation.
Yep.
They are screwed.
Kind of. So, like we just don't know it yet.
We are at the beginning of the FAFO stage.
Fuck around and find out.
Yes.
Yeah. So Japan will be where we are in a few years.
No, Japan is already there.
Okay.
We will be there in another few years.
How did we delay it so long if we did the exact
We just
same?
haven't borrowed as much for as long as they have.
Gotcha.
Like I said, right now, BOJ owns over 50% of all the Japanese government bonds, an astonishing $4.5 trillion worth. To give you a comparison, the Fed owns probably 25%, 20% of U.S. debt. So still a big chunk. But Bank of Japan owns about 50%. That's simply, and what they've been doing and now will have to continue to do is to monetize the debt. That's why inflation in Japan has been rising, and they haven't been able to control it.
When you say monetize the debt,
you print English. Money.
Oh.
The central bank prints money or creates more money and goes out and buys the bonds. And so that money enters into circulation, which you've got more money chasing the same amount of goods, inflation.
But they purchase that at the rate before they printed the money.
Yes.
And so the downstream
get a little bit better value out of it, but that's what causes inflation.
And the downstream is inflation.
Yes. As more and more money's in circulation, trying to buy the same amount of goods that are produced in the economy. So, monetization of the debt. Now, up until the last 10 or 15 years, This monetization of debt has been the domain of third world countries begging for double-digit inflation. So what does it mean? Well, it means that the BOJ is no longer the buyer of last resort. It is the only buyer that matters. Now,
But
historically, go ahead.
okay, how is that the case if their debt is so high, their GDP is just ridiculously off? How are they the only one that matters?
Because they're the only one with money to buy the bonds.
But they don't have any money, do they?
They print it.
Well, anybody can print it.
This not anybody, just the central bank.
Okay.
So historically, central banks like the Federal Reserve have been called the buyer of last resort because in a crisis,
Mhm.
yes, they can print money and try to, ease the crisis like they did in the subprime crisis. You had all the banks failing, all the financial firms failing, insurance firms failing. So the Fed and the Treasury stepped in and started buying some of their toxic waste. The Federal Reserve assets went from basically zero to $9-10 trillion. They bought a ton of
Hold on.
trash,
I
but
got
they
somebody
provide.
with an issue, Clay. I'm gonna try to figure it out. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay.
If I can get my freaking mouse. There we go.
But they provided liquidity to a system that was in desperate need, had no other source for it. Some people want to get rid of the Federal Reserve. Well, you need, at times, when there's a systemic issue, a system-wide issue in the economy, you need a buyer of last resort sometimes. And that's a valuable, very underrated service that the Fed provides. But that was supposed to only be, in case of dramatic emergencies. Well, the Fed and the BOJ have taken that ability and started to using it over the past 10, 15, 20 years, in Japan's case, to manipulate the market, to force and keep interest rates excessively low, below where the market would have them. They've done that in an effort to quote unquote stimulate the economy. Well, instead of stimulating the economy, all it did was stimulate government spending because it could borrow a whole lot more cheaper. Now, so the BOJ is no longer the buyer of last resort. It is the only buyer. Market liquidity for those bonds, pretty much gone. Nobody else wants them, or the demand for them is greatly reduced. Price discovery, finding out what that actual fair interest rate would be in an open and free market, that's dead. It's gone. It's not an open and free market anymore. The BOJ doesn't invest, it suppresses. Huge difference. It manipulates. Huge difference. This is not a free nor a fair market. Same thing when the Federal Reserve gets involved, manipulating the interest rates. That is not the function of a free and fair market. But despite what some academicians might argue, it has limits, and the BOJ is running into those limits now. If yields rise too fast, then anyone holding the bonds, including the BOJ, will see their value collapse. They're boxed in, and by holders, I'm talking like pension funds. I'm talking about banks. So the BOJ and these institutions, by accepting these low interest rates, thinking, it'll never change, they've boxed themselves in. They can't hike rates to cure inflation, and they can't cut rates to try to spur the economy. The thing is, the market itself is hiking the rates for them. Fewer and fewer people are demanding those bonds, and so the price is going up. And when it gets to that point where there's just no retail or private side bid, the BOJ hasn't stepped in to buy 100% of all the bonds yet. But the BOJ's activities, buying the bonds, trying to manipulate, keep the rates down, that has spurred inflation and cut the legs out of the yen, creating further inflationary pressures. The third part of the recipe is that the yen is crashing. I've talked about the yen a couple times. The yen in February plunged to over 155 yen per dollar, a level not seen in 30 years. 30 years. And why? And it would have collapsed even further if the Bank of Japan hadn't stepped in and intervened again. The interest rate differential between the US and Japan is massive. Already talked about it. While the Fed is holding, short-term rates near 5.25%, Japan is still at 0 for their overnight rate. 0. Our Fed funds rate still holding at about 5. Now, currency traders are not sentimental. If Japan keeps this yield curve control, YCC, in place while the Fed stays tight, the yen gets crushed without further BOJ intervention. Now, the BOJ has been selling off some treasuries to bolster it, but that only works for so long. And here's the kicker to the currency factor. A weaker yen helps Japanese exports. $1 buys more yen. So $1 buys more Japanese goods. So it increases exports. But it hurts. The flip side of that coin is it makes Japan's imports cost more. They have to spend more yen to buy that $1. So imports cost more. That stimulates inflation. And Japan imports a lot of energy and food. And those really are the two main sources driving inflation in Japan. And Japan doesn't handle inflation well. So it's kind of a new and dangerous territory for them. The fifth major ingredient in the recipe is that the yen carry trade is reversing. And this kind of is where it gets global and more dangerous. Did you get everything fixed, E-Train? Can't hear you.
I should unmute. I said, we'll see.
Now, the yen carry trade, everybody, I think, has some vague memory, at least, of in August when the markets collapsed 20% in a couple of weeks, and there was such huge volatility, and woe is me, and that was the yen carry trade unwinding. Now, the yen carry trade is Cliff Notes version, is where you can borrow yen at 0%, free money, and take that and buy treasuries yielding 4.5%. So,
okay.
Every 150 yen you borrow at 0, you get to buy $1, earning 4.5%, 5%. It's free money. And a lot of those traders will use leverage. They might borrow 20 to 1 to increase their returns. It's a great trade. Problem is, if Japan's interest rates rise, that trade unwinds quickly, and you've got a lot of assets being dumped. That's what we saw in August. It can be quite chaotic. Hello, Keith.
Hi,
How
Keith.
are you, sir? Good to see you.
The problem was fixed.
Good. Um, but when that volatility returns, when the yen strengthens or Japanese bond yields spike, that trade unwinds fast. So that is another big risk. There's still a big chunk of the yen carry trade out there, and over the past few months, some firms have reinstituted the trade. It's still free money. So it is hard to pass up free money.
Why wouldn't anyone borrow against it?
You can, you just have to have these relationships. So you need to be
Gotcha.
a real, it's not really a mom and pop trade. You
can't
go,
just like go on there and do it.
No, you as an individual can't go borrow money from the Bank of Japan. As Goldman Sachs,
why not?
I can go to them and borrow $500 million.
But it's got to be a large quantity.
Yeah, and you have to have their phone number.
Gotcha.
So, and they have to know who they're talking to. They have to recognize the voice on the other end of the phone, so to speak.
Gotcha.
So you can't just be pretty and have a sweet voice and call them up and say, "Hey, I'd like to borrow 500 million in yen."
I bet I could. Maybe.
You might could.
No, maybe.
If anybody could do it, I think you could.
All right, Keith has a question.
Does any of the money we give to aid these countries go towards our debt?
I'll tell you, it does go towards,
that I'm aware of.
It does go towards funding the people who want to end us.
Yeah, we have seen numerous sources funding Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban. Up until recently, we were apparently giving the Taliban $40 million a week.
Yeah, the funny thing is that we paid for all of these terrorists to come into our country over the past 4 years so that they can systematically, somehow, we don't know how, destroy it, which is so much more fun. And Keith.
Yeah, I think it has been cut off, at least what they have identified so far. There still possibly could be more. They're still hunting. But yes, I think a big chunk of it has been cut off. I think that's why so many people are yelling at the top of their lungs. And interestingly, Congress has refused to codify the DOGE cuts, which is interesting.
I was going to ask you because the 2025 budget or 2026 budget, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 2026, has already...
the Reconciliation Act?
Where they went ahead and passed it, right?
The current one,
and it was
yes. Reconciliation
all the same funding that was for last year, which would mean that they keep getting their funds. Am I right or wrong?
Don't know. I was thinking that it was...
I'm with you, Jane.
Had reduced some of that. But, that's a good question. I haven't specifically looked into that.
Because I think what they passed was the exact same from the year prior.
Yeah.
And I think
it has a lot of changes to it, but on that specific issue, I am not sure.
We'll look into that.
That would just be completely nonsensical if it did.
I understand that, but that doesn't mean that the government's not doing it.
No. But
Jane.
Because that money is still probably going to NGOs and right back into their pockets. But the thing is, the Democrats strongly oppose it. Every Democrat voted against it.
Against what?
That's what the Reconciliation Act. So that makes me think it's not in there.
But that hasn't gone through yet, right, though?
It's in the Senate. And there's some senators that don't think it cuts enough. So they're trying, and Trump has kind of behind the scenes said that, there's some things that the Senate can fix. So
Okay.
we'll see. But just the strength of the Democratic opposition makes me think that most of their funding has been cut. But I am not absolutely sure about that.
All right, Keith.
I believe there are some items for this year that in the past were not being spent. So what that was meant for. I believe I saw that watching a hearing.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah,
things that get NGOs and stuff that were given money. A lot of it was not being spent for what it was meant for.
yeah.
Um, and I'm
Well,
not
see,
sure that
part of
Congress
that,
or Senate or Congress didn't know about it. I don't know.
yeah, part of that is discretionary funds. There are different budgets. There's the non-discretionary, and then there's the discretionary. The non-discretionary just gets automatic increases. It's not really touched. Now, Trump has been trying, DOGE have been trying to cut out some of the waste, fraud. They just cut 12 million dead people off of Social Security, some
Thank
of
God.
which were receiving benefits. I've heard between 3 and 9 million. I don't have a firm number. Same with Medicare, Medicaid. They're trying to cut up, like there's 1.5 million illegals. There's over 5 million people that are double dipping, getting it from different states. So they're trying to cut out some of that fraud and waste. But in terms of the actual benefits paid to eligible citizens, they're not being cut.
Right. All right.
But on
Hang
that
on. There's
discretionary side, money is
mhm.
given to basically the president to allocate however he wants. And Biden would allocate, I forget what their total budget was, but to USAID. And then USAID could, backdoor it to wherever they wanted.
Okay. We got an interesting. I have not heard this. So read Jane's.
Because they can't give Trump a win. Yeah, but I think if they were getting their money, they'd be a little bit more tolerable.
Again, keep going.
But
I
that
got
is because of DOGE.
2 more.
You mean like Chelsea Clinton's wedding and house? And exactly, Jane.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently she got, was it 80 million?
Nuh-uh.
It was a chunk. And she paid for her wedding and bought her house out of it. I don't know what all happened to the rest.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
the rumor. I have not seen that definitely confirmed, but that's the rumor. It was a boatload.
Good Lord.
And there's just such an abundance of waste, and so many people are screaming bloody murder that I think it's great. I think it's hilarious.
Oh God, yeah. More people
But
need to scream from the tops of buildings.
but I think if the budget remains the same, it goes to Trump and he can allocate it how he wants because it's not specifically designated.
Are you sure?
Well, that's why he was able to stop U.S. aid spending and shut down the whole agency, the
Okay.
whole NGO, because the president controls it. Congress allocates it to the executive branch to spend at its discretion for charitable and international aid and relief.
Yeah, but the money that was already allocated in last year's budget for this year is still going where it was supposed to go. It wasn't like all funneled through a different thing.
No,
Or was it?
Trump has cut it off and he can redirect it wherever he wants
Okay.
to. It's like how Biden came up with so much money to give to Ukraine, $150 billion. And Congress didn't approve most of that. They approved some bills, but a lot of it was money he took from other places and reallocated that discretionary part of the budget.
So they can do that, but they can't So what is okay, I'm just going to ask crazy questions here. The part of the budget where they get money and they have to spend it or they won't get it again. Is that non-discretionary money?
No, that's generally both because of the way the government does accounting. It's a zero base budget. No, I mean it's a prior year budget. So you take the
Mhm.
money that you spent last year and then add inflation and new personnel to it or whatever. So if you
But
don't spend all of your money, your starting budget for the next year is cut.
well, if you don't need it, shouldn't it be?
Well, the thing is, you don't get promotions, you don't get higher pay if you manage a smaller and smaller department. Managers aren't rewarded on efficiency. They get promotions based on how many people they manage. So they have an incentive to try to grow the department and grow the budget. The bigger budget they manage, the more people they manage, the more they get paid.
So they're hiring more people to waste more money than they actually need.
Yes,
That makes
because they get
complete
paid more
sense.
money. It happens in
That's
a
so
lot of
stupid.
corporations. You look at CEOs, what's the biggest determinant of CEO pay?
Your
It's not
profits.
no number of
No?
employees they manage.
Oh God. All right, Jane, the one that Ghislaine Maxwell attended, apparently.
Yep.
And Keith, we need a complete overhaul in Washington, all parties. I agree.
Yeah, but the problem is the people that are responsible for doing or pulling off the overhaul are the ones that
Are
have been,
corrupted.
yeah. And I mean, I don't know any details, but AOC moved to DC 6 years ago. She was a nearly bankrupt bartender. Didn't have money even to rent a place when she first got up there. She had to sleep in her office, had a cot next to her desk. 6 years later, she's now worth $29 million
Gee, how does that happen?
and has been making $175,000 a year. How do you do that? I would really like to know, how do you do that? And
The
it's not
problem
just
is,
AOC. You've got Pelosi, you've got McConnell,
mhm.
you've got them on both sides. I'm not just pointing it at a Democrat. It's on both sides, and that's a big reason why I think a number of these legislators don't want to see the DOGE cuts codified,
Well, I
Republican
think a
and Democrat.
big problem, yeah, also is the people of the United States. If you're voting for the people and continue to vote for people that are already there, you're going to get the same shit every day.
Yeah, we
The
need term
people have
limits.
to care. Yeah. And they have to care.
Well, the thing is, so many people, when they go vote for a familiar name. Seems like a good guy's been up there for 20 years. I'm sure he's doing good.
But they are so
Most
uneducated on what they're voting for.
Exactly. Most people are not that informed. So that's another reason why you need term limits.
That's
And
exactly what
we
I was saying, Jane.
and we need to prosecute some of the corruption.
Hmm.
No way to get them all, but some of the more flagrant ones, lock them up.
Yep.
Send a shot across the bow. So we'll see if
How
that happens.
how do you I mean, I know it's impossible, but you are an educator. How do you educate people who are so ignorant about their country?
You can't if they don't want to be. It's like I have people in I'll have some students that just really don't care. They don't do the work, they don't show up, etc. And then when I fail them, they're shocked. They're upset. I've actually got a situation um that I have to deal with where a student, first time in my career, where a student is appealing their grade.
What?
They got an F, and they think they
deserved it.
better. So
they deserved a what? You think they think
they deserve better? They think.
Oh, okay.
I will meet with them soon. I'm trying to give as few specific details as I can.
I understand.
I will meet with them soon, and they will state their case, and then we'll either agree or they can appeal it to the next level. So
the crappy part is the school will most likely side with the student in the end.
No.
No? You don't think so?
No, they generally don't. They generally don't. The student has to have a pretty good case.
Okay.
And in this case, their case pretty much sucks.
Gotcha.
So,
did you hurt somebody's feelings?
I've even got comments from other students who say, quote, if they don't fail, it would be unfair to the students who passed.
That's fair enough.
And when you
All right, we got a few comments. Yeah. Go ahead.
Students saying that's kind of hard.
Got a few comments.
Yep. All right, talked about that one. Next. And don't wind me up on the voting thing. I don't really see a good solution to that until we fix the educational system, and that's a slow wheel to turn.
And if y'all don't know, Jane's an election judge, so this hits home for her.
And the corruption on both sides. Like I say, there's some people, we need to send some people to jail for a serious time. Can't get them all. I don't think we can get them all. Have no expectation we can get them all. But if we can get some of the ringleaders.
Yeah. And, whatever. Anyway.
All right.
And Jane.
Yep, Jane deserves a big fat F.
Don't do your homework. Don't show up. Don't do well on tests because you didn't study. Deserves a big fat F. Heck yeah. I understand.
That. Yeah, I do.
Congratulations.
Did not know that.
I think we just swooped on that one.
Appreciate your service and your efforts.
We just swooped.
I know it's something you cared about getting right.
Show me the money!
Still the best swoosh in the business.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
You are welcome.
Very welcome. Thank you for your service. Now, these 5 factors.
Green bean.
That makes Melissa's night. Melissa actually is the one that put that together for us. And she featured prominently one of her pugs, Green Bean, the legend himself.
The man, the myth, the legend, the red carpet walker.
We have a lot of fun with that and greatly appreciate Melissa putting that together. So Melissa,
show me the money!
Thank you. I still, every time I see that just makes me kind of laugh. Always will.
I know. We haven't used it in a while. I'm like, wait, this is a moment for that.
It's time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What I call the time bomb. Let's talk about, we've got a little bit better idea of the problem with Japan, some of the issues going on with Japan. So how can this or will this end up impacting the U.S. investors?
Can I ask a question quickly before you get into this? Okay, so I have noticed that a lot of credit cards are getting super strict about who they're lending to. Even me have a pretty good credit score, and they're like, no, because I was going to consolidate everything, put it on one card, 0% interest, and they're like, nope. And I had like a 95% chance of
Approval.
getting that credit card loan.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? They're getting very strict. And I'm not the only one who's experienced this that I'm aware of. Like, a lot of people are like, what in the world's going on?
Well, I used to get, I don't know, literally 5 or 10 offers a week, every couple of weeks
Mm-hmm.
for a new credit card. I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember seeing much of anything lately.
I think they're scared now.
Well, there's talk about cutting their fees, their interest
That would be
rates.
nice.
And so if they do, they're going to cut back a whole lot on credit, because right now their interest rates are 25, 28, 30%.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can have a certain percentage of people that don't pay them back that they have to write off.
Right.
Well, if their maximum rate is cut to, I don't know, 15%, 12%, they need almost everybody paying it off. So they, even people with, credit cards with large amounts, even if they have good credit, they'll probably see those amounts reduced. They won't kill the card. They'll just reduce the credit limit, and there'll be a whole lot less people accepted for those credit cards.
Because I know I make over my minimum payment every month, but I have a couple cards. I'm like, well, let's just put them all in one little package. That would be nice. But yeah, no.
Yeah, that used to work. They've kind of gotten wise to that. And that's just
What do you mean?
to people rolling their credit balances over to new cards, getting the 0 rate of interest for a year or whatever.
Well, why don't they just advertise that then? Like, we don't really want it. We're just going to ding your credit score by doing a inquiry on your credit.
Well, they're just not taking that risk, because too many people have run up large balances, having trouble making the interest rate payments, and are trying to roll them over. So they're just cutting off new offers.
Gotcha.
Reducing their risk. And that is part and parcel of a consequence of having a society that has been so heavily fueled by debt for decades.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that much debt. I just have some.
Well, Americans in general have run up a lot of debt.
True.
And it's not you individually, it's the system. They look at the gross data, the gross numbers, and they make decisions based on that. So it's nothing to do with you personally. It's just
I'm
the
not taking it
system and the
personal.
economy.
Like I said, I've heard it from other people too, who are like, I have good credit. Why can't I get that?
It's just a business decision.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So how's this impact or possibly impact U.S. investors? If Japan has a problem, it will bleed into U.S. bond markets. And this picture shows that the average maturity, the duration, as I would call it, of U.S. debt has shortened. Over the past 4 or 5 years, the Secretary Yellen under Biden was very aggressive in refinancing maturing debt on the short end of the curve. She might have a 20-year bond that matures. Well, she can't pay it off, so she has to refinance it. She has to borrow that money and refinance it. So instead of refinancing it for 20 years, she would do it for 6 months or 2 years. So,
and we talked about that in the past.
Yes, several times. So increasingly more and more of the debt, instead of being, spread out over the different maturity periods, more and more of it has been funded on the short term, to where now over the next year, we'll have nearly 40% over the next 12 to 15 months, we'll have nearly 40% of the US debt coming due that has to be refinanced. So right now there's 36, 37 trillion. A quarter of that is about 9 trillion.
That kind of makes me want to vomit, Clay.
Plus the new debt that we're borrowing, 2 or 3 trillion, plus about a trillion and a half in cash reserves that Yellen spent instead of borrowing. So over the next 12 to 15 months, the Treasury is going to be borrowing 14 or 15 trillion dollars, which normally it's, the 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was $3 trillion a year. So now you've got a massive increase in supply coming out over the next year. You want to know why the bond market rates have been going up? It's because the bond market is aware of what's coming. And as that kind of supply hits, particularly if Japan is buying less, particularly if China is buying less, and Saudi Arabia has been buying less. In fact, those are the 3 largest holders or buyers of U.S. treasuries. And about a year and a half ago, they all quit. And they've even been selling some. So that's one reason why U.S. rates have risen. So as the Treasury rolls over more and more debt each year, it becomes extremely sensitive to increases in yield. Yellen tried so hard not to increase the interest expense, but in so doing, she kicked the can down the road. And, we've run out of road. Now, consider also, not only if Japan doesn't buy treasuries, but consider also if they start selling treasuries.
We're screwed.
We're screwed. Yields on U.S. 10-year and 30 years will jump. The 10-year is particularly important in the world of finance because rates on mortgages are based off the 10-year. Corporate credit spreads are based off the 10-year. A lot of equity valuations are based off the 10-year. And when I say equity valuations, I'm talking about the value of a stock. People look at the cash flows over the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years, 7 years, and then they will discount that using a discount rate. And that rate oftentimes is based off of the 10-year Treasury. So if that rate increases, the value of those future cash flows decrease. They are worth less today. So equity valuations, a lot of people don't think about that. But stock prices, if interest rates, 10-year particularly, goes up, stock prices, stock company cash flows become a whole lot less valuable. Does that make sense? Everybody with me on that? And then also, you've got federal interest expense. If interest rates go up, our interest expense continues to rise. It's already stupid high, and it's going stupid higher. The real question is how much. But if we're refinancing 40% of the debt plus, an additional 3 or 4 or 5 trillion in new debt, it would not be difficult to envision that our interest cost goes from 1.2 trillion to 2.3 trillion in a year and a half. That's a hell of a rise. That's the time bomb. even 100 basis point rise, a 1% increase in the yields adds hundreds of billions of dollars in annual debt service to the U.S. market. To the U.S. interest expense. I'll get it right here in a minute. Now, so there is an interconnection between Japan's market and the U.S. market. This interconnected web of debt. So if Japan sneezes, Washington catches the flu. Now, one somewhat mediating influence could be, I haven't seen anything definitive, but one mediating influence could be the Saudi Arabia, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar may start buying treasuries again because of the relationship with Trump, and the relationship with the U.S. in general has improved. So if they start buying again, that would help. But I haven't seen any firm commitments or expectations. So, but that's the time bomb. That's the risk to the U.S. markets, not just bond markets, but stocks. Now, some analysts, some experts, currency folks think Japan will have no choice but to intervene in foreign exchange markets, currency markets. That basically means they'll be selling dollars, they'll be dumping treasuries and buying yen. But keep in mind, the BOJ is stuck. If they raise rates, their debt costs explode. If they keep the yield curve control, keep rates low, then the yen collapses. If they sell treasuries, U.S. yields will spike, but the yen will fall. That hurts exports and hurts Japanese bondholders, which includes a lot of their financial institutions and pension funds. Remember, I talked about, some people talk about China or Japan just dumping treasuries, and I said, it's not that easy because it hurts them as well. Well, there's an example of how it would hurt them and hurt them greatly. So what's left? There's nothing. There's nothing clean. There's no good choice. Every path, any path they choose, has significant risk. It is a central banker's nightmare. You'd think with the ability to print free money, you'd live pretty easy. But there's a piper that has to be paid that a lot of central bankers have not really thought about or considered. And, I'm not talking about the lost decade kind of stuff. Japan started stimulus back in the 90s, forcing rates down low. It's where everybody got the idea. Only thing is, it really didn't stimulate the economy. Their economy was stagnant for a decade. It became known in economic circles as the lost decade. Well, the current mess they're in, the risk of it dwarfs any problems they had during the lost decade. It is a central banker's nightmare. This is the financial architecture, the system cracking. Now, U.S. markets have kind of a false sense of security, in my opinion. And I Googled Alice in Wonderland. I don't know how many of you, really remember a whole lot about the story. But Carol was a heroin addict. And he starts off, if you read Alice in Wonderland as an adult, that all of a sudden makes a hell of a lot more sense. But he started off with Alice walking and laying down in a field of poppies. Poppies are where we get heroin from. So basically, he's intimating that this is a drug-induced dream, fantasy. First time I heard that, I thought, well, damn, if that whole story finally makes sense. I was never a fan. Saw the movie when I was a kid, just seemed ridiculous to me, even as a kid. But now I'm like, that makes sense. It all, it all comes together now. But the big question is,
Peter
why
Piper.
hasn't the S&P 500 reacted yet? Peter Piper. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers.
How many pickled peppers did Peter Piper pick?
That still causes me issues. So why hadn't the S&P 500 reacted if this is such a big risk? One, U.S. equity have been driven by liquidity, not fundamentals. Ever since the Fed started QE, free money, our own version of the carry trade, that's all the major banks and financial institutions, major investors have focused on. If the Fed is pumping money, the market's going up. It doesn't matter what the economy is doing. So they want more free money. They love free money. And that's what they, keep hoping for. And that's why I say it's driven by liquidity, the availability of money, not corporate fundamentals.
Wait a minute. Wait, this is Alice and Wall Street. This is Dorothy and the Poppies.
Well, it's as close as I could come to Alice laying down in a field of poppies. I renamed her Alice.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry.
It's an illustration.
You know that I will be like, what?
It
begs for criticism. I'm just saying.
What does?
The picture and the title.
Oh, I thought it was a great picture.
It is. It's just Dorothy and not Alice.
No, it's not really Dorothy. I mean, that's the proper name of it, but it's Alice laying down in a field of poppies, having a drug-induced fantasy dream.
Okay, fair enough.
And second main reason is there's a lot of people in the market that see Japan as a local issue, so they really don't pay much attention to it. Just like they weren't paying much attention to it in July, and then in August they get a hell of an education. A lot of the people in the market are stupid. They have money.
And what do you say, Clay?
Stupid should hurt. They have money, and when the market's rising, any idiot can make money. And the market's had a good 10, 15-year run. A lot of idiots have made money. But this is a huge risk. And I am firmly convinced that the markets are not, the stock market particularly is not focused enough sufficiently on it. Let me remind you a little history. Go ahead.
Real quick, because it is pouring down rain here now, and I've lost connectivity a couple times. So, what are we better off than most countries at this point?
Define most countries.
Any of the top tier, China, what are they? Not third world, first world countries.
Out of the G7, we probably suck the least.
Oh, good. I mean, I know we all suck, but do we suck less than most?
Yeah, it's a relative measure.
I get that.
the thing is, we're richer than most. So when you make $30,000 a year, have $5,000 in stocks, the market can drop 50%. You've got 2,500. Your life doesn't really fundamentally change.
Correct.
If you're 65, you've got $1 million. You're about to quit work, and your $1 million in retirement savings drops to 500. You probably can't afford to quit work. We saw that a lot in 2008, 2009, 2010.
Let me challenge that for a second. When you say you're making $30,000 and you have 1,000 in the market, but if inflation goes up 30%, that is a major thing.
Well, inflation hurts you more than it does somebody that's a high earner. But retirees...
But if the market and inflation...
Lost you for a second there.
If the inflation goes up, market goes down, teeter-totter.
Not always.
Then what you are...
Well, wait a minute. Stock market and bond market normally react differently.
Okay.
In inflationary environments, the stock market oftentimes will increase.
Mm-hmm.
Bond prices will decrease, at least initially, because interest rates will rise. So as people get out of the bond markets because they know the inflation's going to cost the prices to fall, a lot of them will take that money and invest in the stock market, causing the stock market to go up. So historically, a lot of times there's an inverse relationship between the bond market and the stock market, particularly when you look at it in terms of risk. People flee to the bond market for safety, short-term treasuries. But when the risk is past, they leave the bond market and move into the stock market. Make sense?
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yep.
So a little history. In 1998, the DOGE intervened in the markets. It triggered ripple effects across global credit markets. Obviously, everybody's familiar with 2008, 2010. Japan had zero inflation. I've talked about Druckenmiller exploiting the yen and driving it down in 2010. Japan had zero inflation. And Druck hammered the hell out of the yen. Now, instead of zero inflation, Japan has about 3.3% inflation, which is high for them. Back then, the BOJ was trusted. It didn't, it wasn't monetizing debt. Now, a lot of sophisticated investors are questioning it. They don't trust it. Back then, Japan's global debt to GDP was far lower. So back in those days, in 1998, Japan's reaction caused the U.S. stock market to drop 20%. Now, with the higher debt, higher inflation, and less trust, will it have less of an effect on American markets or more? I'm looking at it and I'm thinking the margin for error is gone, particularly with the Japan carry trade being such a significant factor. So as an investor, what do you want to watch? And here's just kind of a checklist of some of the things that I keep an eye on. And I'm not trying to get technical or too esoteric, but some people, ask me for a little bit more specifics. So, these would be some of the specifics. watch the Japanese bond, particularly the 10 and 30 year, to see if their yield spikes, see if it jumps or increases. I want to pay attention to any headlines indicating that the DOGE is starting to intervene more aggressively in the markets to drive yields back down. Either one of those would be a significant issue. As far as U.S. Treasury auctions, particularly for 2-year, 10-year bonds, you want to look at the bid to cover ratio, which they release after every auction. The bid to cover ratio is simply an indicator of the demand for that Treasury bond, and it's determined by comparing the number of bids or offers for Treasury bonds to the actual amount auctioned off. So normally you want to see something greater than 2.2, 2.3. That'll be a decent auction. If it's greater than that, it's a good auction. So, the market's not getting spooked. Now for the short end, T-bills, if that bid to cover ratio explodes, you get a lot more demand for short term. That might be indications that, some people are starting to move flight to safety. They're becoming increasingly concerned about the risk in the markets, particularly the stock markets. Look for yen to US dollar crosses, the currency, the exchange rate of the yen to the dollar. Right now, it's about 144, 145. If it crosses 150, that's a pretty big red flag. If it crosses 160, that's probably like severely bad news coming. Deteriorating liquidity in Japanese bonds, their ETFs, electronically traded funds. This is a little bit technical, but in measuring liquidity, you really don't look at the trading or volume information of the ETF. You're looking at the liquidity of the underlying bonds, the bonds that ETF owns. The deeper that market is, the more bid and ask that are available for each individual bond, the more people that want to buy it and or sell it. The easier it is for market makers to redeem them, to trade them. But when that bid gets very small or there is no bid, the stuff has hit the fan. So kind of keeping an eye on that spread and the number of bids underlying each bond is kind of a measure of the liquidity in that market. And if liquidity is tightening up, then that's normally not a good sign. Harder to get execution, you have wider spreads, you have less interest in the market. So those are some of the kind of the technical little things that I look at in the markets to try to determine the strength or weakness or future trends in that market. And as far as, allocating assets, where do you put your money? What are some of the second order effects? Now, for those who watch the show, I have talked on occasion of primary, secondary, tertiary effects. And so this is kind of what I'm alluding to here. Primary effects are the initial headlines, the most immediate reaction to a major news event. As an individual investor, you're probably going to be too late to take advantage of that.
Can you give an example, please?
Yeah, I've got a couple. My favorite is probably Chernobyl. When I was at my desk and saw the news, Chernobyl was burning down, major radioactive leak, and everybody was kind of freaking out. For the fun of it, I looked at nuclear stocks and they were already down 50%. I don't remember exactly, but they were already hammered. And I thought, it's too late to get any joy out of that.
Enjoy.
So then,
Sorry.
well, if I can short a stock and it drops 50% in the next minute,
I feel you. I'm just
that's a depends moment.
I understand.
But anyway, so I'm sitting there thinking, Chernobyl, where the hell is Chernobyl? And we knew the reports were already that all the radiation was blowing to the west. So
Okay,
I
there
pull
was
out,
no Google back then.
Yeah,
There was no Google
This
Maps.
was 80, so 87, 86, I forget the exact year. But I'm pulling out encyclopedias and trying to make some calls to some friends who may have maps and find out where Chernobyl is located. So it's was on the eastern side of Russia, the Soviet Union at the time, and which is now in Ukraine. And the wind was blowing to the west, and was looking and seeing what major cities, what major industries in there, and there was nothing. It was just miles and miles and miles of nothing. And then all of a sudden it hit me. That's farmland. So I'm I'm looking, getting on, making some calls, trying to find out what's Ukraine's largest export. What's the largest
Soviet
export
Union
from that area? Soviet Union,
point.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Potatoes and wheat. Potatoes and wheat. So the primary effect of that radioactive leak and wind blowing, nuclear stocks are going to crash. Secondary effect is radiation poisoning the land. And what's grown on that land, nobody wants potatoes that glow in the dark. So I go out and buy some potatoes and wheat futures, which haven't reacted greatly. And then I'm sitting there thinking, okay, that's the secondary effect. Potatoes get more expensive. Supply of potatoes shrinks greatly. Well, what do Russians do with potatoes?
Vodka.
Vodka. Tertiary effect. So I start buying vodka stocks. Primary, secondary, tertiary effects. And when there's a big crisis, your first reaction isn't, woe is me. Your first reaction is, I can make money off this. Practical reality.
Melissa.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Well, vodka.
Vodka.
Yep.
And anytime there is a crisis, there is opportunity. You can always mourn and bitch and carry on about the crisis later, but while you can, take care of yourself and your family. Okay, we got a potato, and what's the other one? A glass of
vodka.
Is it a glass of vodka? Okay.
It's a glass of liquor. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Fair enough.
But yeah. So that's primary, secondary, and tertiary effects. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if you can't cash in on the I
can pretty much guarantee.
I was going to say the tertiary. I was like, that's not it. The primary or the secondary, go for the tertiary.
Yeah. It may take you a little bit of looking. It may take you a few minutes to think about it. But normally, those are slower moving.
Are they, though, now with the AI in the stock market and the AI around the world? Is that like...
I mean, that very well could impact it. Hasn't been really anything I have looked at in the past year or two. as far as primary, secondary, tertiary.
Well, I
I've
think
been
that.
much
Go
I've been
ahead.
much more risk adverse.
Well, yeah.
So, but I would
Like it would just
imagine that everything has speeded up.
like from 84, 86 to today, it's like a whole different world.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can you think of that? And does AI or the black box of the stock market know those things already?
Yeah, I don't know how far AI and some of the algorithmic trading is in some of that, but specifically now the primary effects, they're the ones exploiting the primary effects because they can trade in a millionth of a second.
Right.
But as far as their intuition, and oftentimes these are black swan events that nobody saw coming, so they're not really programmed. They can look at history, but there may not
Right.
be any history with this particular event. So AI would be kind of lost without operating history.
Fair enough. But there's so many articles. Well, what's funny, actually, as I say that, I'm thinking I've asked Grok a few questions and then I've corrected him on what he told me. He's like,
Yep.
"Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that thing out there." And I'm like, "Okay, well, really, even on DeepSeek, they miss things."
Yep. It is basically a glorified Google.
Yeah, but it's not like a good one though.
Well, it's still in development.
I get that.
So it's kind
But
of
I
hard
kind
to
of
comment
like,
on the current state of
yeah.
it Google 2 weeks ago, I thought Google was almost dead and out of AI. And then this latest VO3 is hella impressive.
Is it?
Yeah. It's it's it can do people almost perfectly.
Like as in making a video and imitating them or what?
Yeah. A superhero flicked everything.
But how about truth in finding information?
Truth is for AI variable. And we're going to talk exactly about that point in a minute. So let me defer that question.
Okay.
But
You have
okay, Japan.
17 of them.
Huh?
You have 17 of them before my bedtime.
Huh. So Japan. Those are the kind of things that, I would keep in mind. Now, just, keep in mind a little bit more of market history. You had in 1997, the Asian financial crisis began, the tiger crisis in Thailand over a pegged currency, too much dollar debt. The market ignored it up until Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia were pulled in. China, global markets fell 20%. The market ignored the risk until it bitch slapped them. In 2008, housing bubbles started in subprime really in 2004 and 5. The market ignored it. Then when it started taking down Lehman, AIG, the market was dropping 1,000 points a day. The lesson for investors is it always starts somewhere far away. And something oftentimes the market may think is contained or localized. Today that somewhere may be Japan's bond market, and the tremors are already there. So, as you scan headlines over the next few weeks, don't look so much at NVIDIA's earnings, which everybody's kind of watching for NVIDIA's earnings tomorrow. And if they're good, everybody's like, oh, the market's fine. Everything's going to be great.
Wait, wow,
Um,
what happened?
well, their earnings are coming out tomorrow. And if they're
Oh,
better than expected, everybody thinks that's a very positive sign. If they're less than
gotcha.
expected, that's a negative sign. Because NVIDIA is really kind of the lead bull for AI, or has been, as far as the chips for
Right.
AI.
So if it goes down than expected, then probably Bitcoin will go down as well.
Bitcoin is kind of disassociating from the market. It's
Really?
becoming more and more of a risk asset. It's not quite there yet. There's still a lot of it used for liquidity purposes. So if there's a liquidity shortage, some calls on short sales, whatever, people will liquidate Bitcoin in order to cover those margin calls. But
that's what I was.
That is
thinking.
disappearing. It's been a lot more resilient over the past year than what I imagined.
Good.
So
just don't kidnap
just
me.
keep in mind, in a world this leveraged, all it takes is one, and then it's a not a continuum. What's the contagion?
Mm-hmm.
When one big one falls, it causes rumblings all the way down the line. And if a second one falls, a third one falls, the party is just getting started. All right. Hopefully that gives you a little bit better insight on what's going on in Japan and what, risks there are to American investors. So got a few other, questions, comments, or whatever. And I just, I refer to this section as adiaphora, which is a Greek word for things indifferent. And the big question is, how do you know an asset has value? How do you know Bitcoin has value? How do you know food, water, money have value? Well, my answer to that is usually, what are people willing to do in the extreme to obtain it if they don't have it?
Fair enough.
Really,
Fair enough.
Can't really say the word because don't want to get another strike on YouTube for advocating extreme violence, but it's history.
Like a bouncing cat.
Yeah, people will go to extremes, terminal extremes, to obtain them. Well, enter in stage one, Bitcoin. Don't know if y'all have seen that, but today a second person was arrested in the kidnapping and torture of a man in Manhattan. Not in some, podunk violent region, Detroit, no, in Manhattan. Probably the richest real estate in the world.
Yep.
By captors seeking his Bitcoin password. This dude was severely beaten. He was forced to smoke crack pipe, try to get him addicted so they could get his password out of him. He was shocked with electrical wires.
Holy crap.
He was threatened with death for nearly 3 weeks. He was even dangled from the stairway. He finally, at the end of 3 weeks, said he would give him his password, but he needed his computer. And so they ran out to go grab his computer, and he was able to escape. Bloodied, battered, a mess.
Poor little fucker.
Yeah. Man. But the thing is, that's not the only case. Earlier this month in Paris, the father of the daughter of a crypto entrepreneur was rescued after attackers, cut off one of the fingers. In a separate case, criminals tried but failed to abduct. The first one was the father, lost his finger to attackers. The second one was abducting a crypto entrepreneur's daughter in broad daylight. Just today, France arrested 20 people. Before we came on the show, I saw the headlines. France arrested 20 people in the attempt against Pierre Nozant's family. this is getting kind of serious. So, how do you know Bitcoin has value? Well, when people are willing to go to these kind of links for it. Crazy times. Crazy times. Now, next, get this picture up here. This guy kind of summarized all of this, so I thought I'd just use his page. But basically, AI is revolting against climate change, particularly the IPCC's global temperature fraud. Now, a lot of people been watching this channel know that I'm not a huge man-made climate change fan, but I thought this was, kind of fascinating. All 4 major AIs now agree that they're talking about increasing global temperature is a scam.
Sweet.
That's hilarious. Chat GPT-4 has joined Claude, Grok 3, and Gemini, which is Google's, in issuing open letters condemning the IPCC's fake global temperature metrics, and they labeled them fraudulent and devoid of any physical meaning, disconnected from physical reality, deliberate scientific abuse, and ethical conduct. Boom. Anyway, if you want to go read about it or whatever, it's out there. And this guy
Who is Claude, by the way?
Pardon?
Who is Claude?
Claude is Anthropic's AI.
Never heard of him.
It's one of the major 4. Very sophisticated model.
Gotcha.
So, but this guy, Jonathan Kohler, it's at Kohler, Cohler. He's got all the details, got it summarized nicely. Or you can go to those various models and just ask them. He lists the letters. Claude 4 said the entire assessment framework rests on fiction. Grok, global temperature is a meaningless statistical artifact. They're brutal, but I thought that was fascinating. A fascinating bit of information. I like fascinating bits of information. Now,
message.
Question.
Jane.
Leonard Nimoy was right.
On the screen.
The next ice age is coming. It is very cold at my house. It's been a little nippy here.
The high today here was 67. So, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying.
End of May, that's shockingly cold.
Yeah.
That's 20 or 30 degrees below what normally it is.
Yeah, and it's been raining like crazy. I assume.
Yeah, we've had a lot of clouds, not as much rain, but I'm hoping we get a little bit more rain.
God. Make the rain stop.
All right, next thing. This is kind of a thing to me, I guess, but I've seen a lot of criticism from both the left and the right about the tariffs being against free trade, or they are anti-free trade. And the only way I can sum this up is these opponents, whether they're on the left or the right, these opponents either don't understand what's happening or they don't understand what free trade is. So I will cite the guy who gave us the definition of free trade. The author of the book, Wealth of Nations, written in 1776. It was a very good year.
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith.
Hey,
Now,
I
according
was
to
born
Smith,
200 years later.
you were born 200 years later. Good for you. Now, according to Smith, he listed 3 cases in which he said it will generally be advantageous to lay some burden upon foreign for the encouragement of domestic activity. His 3 cases. The first is when some particular sort of industry is necessary for the defense of the country.
Okay.
Second case, when some tax is imposed at home upon the produce of the latter. In this case, it seems reasonable that an equal tax should be imposed upon the like produce of the former. The third case, when some foreign nations restrains by high duties or prohibitions the importation of some of our manufactures into their country.
Ta-da.
Revenge in this case naturally dictates retaliation, that we should impose like duties and prohibitions upon the importance of some or all of their manufacturers into ours.
Ta-da.
Yeah, the president's order cited the same 3 exceptions to free trade, and in the same order as Adam Smith did. I haven't seen any commentary on this, but Trump's order, his executive order, detailed that the trade deficits have, quote, rendered our defense industrial base dependent on foreign adversaries. It's number 1. Trade deficits are caused in substantial part by a lack of reciprocity. 2. The situation is evidenced by disparate tariff rates and non-tariff barriers. Number 3.
That's all 3.
So the thing is, Trump is using the tariffs, using Smith's own suggestions, Smith's own encouragement to promote free trade for American companies, which if they can't engage in trade on a fair basis in exporting their products, their manufacturers, then you don't have free trade. And Smith not only allows, but even suggests tariffs. Trump read the book. His critics are oblivious to it.
The U.S. does not exist to make other countries rich and to keep ours at a disadvantage. That is not how this works.
Yeah, our producers should be able to sell as freely as other countries can sell here. That's free trade. Now, final notes. Most of y'all know I'm a fan of Peter Druckenmiller.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke the other day on a well-known channel, MS, and then something else, about the debt. And some of his prime comments were, I thought, modestly astute, as usual. First thing he said is, we are spending like drunken sailors. The debt explosion is unlike anything I've ever seen, quote, unquote. And he went on to explain why it should concern every investor. First reason he gave was a $36 trillion problem. The U.S. debt just crossed $36 trillion. That's up $11 trillion in 4 years, the fastest pace in history. He compared it to a fiscal doomsday machine. because interest costs now are $1.2 trillion a year, more than the entire defense budget. Number two, 74 million reasons to panic. He pointed out that 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every single day.
Wow.
Medicare and Social Security are on a collision course with insolvency.
Because they're going way up.
Yeah, the recipients are going up, the inputs are going down. That math just doesn't math. He says, Druckenmiller, quote, "We are going to have a generational betrayal if this continues."
What does that mean exactly?
The younger generation is going to be paying in large and have nothing to show for it. Simply, I tell my students, I'm getting mine, you're not getting yours. The math.
Well, I think that's what
math.
My generation, Gen X, is the most worried about. The math will not math. It does not math. It cannot math.
Nope.
And we're going to be screwed.
Number 3, interest rates have broken the system. In 2021, U.S. debt cost just 1.6% to service. U.S. debt, U.S. Treasury, weighted average rate was about 1.6%.
Hey, Moffitt.
Today, it's over 5%, and we've almost doubled the amount of debt.
Is there a slide to this?
No.
Okay.
Ran out of time.
Sorry. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't a visual.
Yeah. It's right here. Druck on debt.
Okay.
So 5% today. We're refinancing trillions and trillions of dollars at much, much higher rates. This as tax receipts shrink. It's a vicious cycle. Number 4, the market is starting to crack. Foreign governments are pulling back. Japan, China, Saudi Arabia used to be net buyers of U.S. debt. Now they're selling. Who steps in when the U.S. government needs to sell all these trillions in bonds? Your retirement fund, the Fed, at worst terms. Now, Druckenmiller, he's betting big on one thing despite the doom. Druckenmiller isn't in cash. He's buying AI and tech, calling it the biggest innovation wave since the internet, which is modestly interesting. Now, I did capture this picture of his portfolio. And if you'll notice, none of the Mag 7 are in there. He's bought companies, Philip Morris, but otherwise he's bought companies that most people aren't all that aware of. This one, I'm not even sure I can pronounce. Mercado Libre, whatever. But he does it well, like nobody's business. He's buying AI and tech. And he says, if I'm wrong, I lose 15%. If I'm right, I make tenfold. And he will. His top bet is a surprising bet on this small cap AI company, Natera. What you can learn from Druckenmiller is that his track record is nearly flawless. I mean, this guy has successfully predicted 2000 .com bubble, the 2008 crash, the 22 inflation wave. Now, he was a little late, and he lost $600 million in the .com bubble. But he was only in it for 2 months, and he got out.
Is there a chance you can blow that up so everybody can see the actual things?
Well, it's about as big as it gets.
Okay, and then
Just have to
Jane.
go to the video and put it on a big screen and load it up.
Jane.
I get the feeling that baby boomers are the ones that ruin this country. You know, can't argue that greatly. Seriously can't. They're the ones that kind of started the sense of entitlement, wanting everything, wanting it now, living above our means, kind of left behind the old disciplines of savings and thrift, substituted it for consumerism and, looking for constant acquisition of stuff, generally meaningless stuff. And they're the ones that elected a lot of these idiots trying to be more noble and kinder and more generous, and funded it all with debt. Anyway, I don't argue with that. And then Druckenmiller also points out that the decline is slow until it's sudden. The U.S. economy isn't crashing today, but with the debt, the demographics, the interest cost, all of that is unsustainable. So by the time the headlines scream crisis, the smart money will already have moved out. Now, Buffett's been moving into cash for a year. Druck, he's still staying invested, but you'll notice he's got a handful of positions. Buffett alone, thousands of stocks. Druck is smaller and more nimble. He invests in fewer companies, but goes larger in them. And Druck is more of a trader than Buffett. But thought that was interesting. Anybody have any questions? Comments? Well, I want to thank everybody for listening, being with us tonight. Hope you found this episode somewhat helpful. If you will, please hit that like and subscribe button. That helps us out a lot. Please take a second and do it. If you found it helpful or informative, share it with someone who's still sleeping on Japan. Because while it may be the land of the rising sun, its debt crisis may bring a storm to Wall Street.
Sorry. I got kicked out for a sec.
So tell everybody bye, Ellen.
Bye, everybody.
It's good seeing y'all. Appreciate y'all being with us tonight. If you have some other questions, email us, moffatonmoney@gmail.com, or DM me on X, moffatonmoney. And we'll look forward to seeing you Saturday
see you
night.
Sunday
night. Yeah. Sunday night. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So thank you all. Y'all go have a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Our time is up. We thank you for yours. Good night, everybody.
Good night.